Good afternoon. Welcome to AutoCAD Long Distance Learning. First thing I want to talk about today is hatches. So a hatch is a fill that we can put inside an object. And the object I chose, it's a block with a hole through it. So as we look at it from the top here, it's a hole, it's a block of wood, a block of aluminum, a block of whatever with a hole drilled straight through it. Now, how I would represent that these lines, because they are part of the geometry, is there, but they're hidden behind. If we stand here and look at our block, we're going to see the solid side of it. We're not actually going to see the hole because it's going to be obscure, but we have to represent it somehow. So we have to show it with hidden lines, as we did before. Let me go to the properties of these lines and see if I can change the line type. Well, there's only one line type, load, which is continuous. The bilayer and bilock are always there. So the first thing I have to do here is load a line type. And we've done this in the past, but it's a good refresher. I'm going to type LT for line type, and it shows me here the line types that are loaded. So let me load one line type called hidden. So I scroll down to the H's, and there's three. There's the hidden normal size, the hidden half size, and the hidden double size. Let me load all three just to have them and hit OK. And now they're loaded. And so now when I go to the properties of this line, then I have the ability to change its line type. Right now is bilayer. Let me change it to one that looks okay. Let's just call it hidden 2. So this is my block. Now, oftentimes hatch is used to show that an object was sliced through, and we can see the texture of it. Let's say it's a wooden block, and let's see if by chance AutoCAD has the wood texture loaded in. So as always, you can type the command, and once you start typing it, it shows up. Oh, there's always a button somewhere, and there it is. When you hit a hatch, you're gonna enter into the hatch creation tab. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. The first thing that we want to look at is the pattern we want to do. Do we want to do a solid or some sort of pattern? And if I click this pull down here, there's going to be a bunch of stuff that that's pre-made for us. You also have the ability to make your own patterns, but I've never had the need to make my own because I've always been lucky enough to find one here, except of course wood. Let's just say for a second it's a concrete block that has some gravel in it. So let's just pick that. And here's what it would look like. Let's assume that it's smooth on the outside, but if we cut through it, and that line I'm showing here is our cut line. So we're taking this block, we're taking a saw, we're cutting through it, and we want to give this a pattern. So if you notice, it defaults to pick points, and if I pick a point, it's going to hatch that as long as that point it's inside of a closed boundary. So if I click out here in space, it's going to tell me that there is no outside boundary, and I won't be able to proceed. You can pick multiple points. If we slice, say we slice the object instead of through the horizontal, through the vertical here, and this is our view. So we're seeing material here, and now we're inside the hole because, and I'm going to finish this hatch. I'm going to say that time we took a slice through there, and that the view, if we slice the block through there, then we're going to see the material, and we're actually inside the hole. We can see the surface of the hole. And let's just assume that it's made of pebbles and rocks. So that's the first way of making a hatch. So I just selected points. You can also select objects. So let me just select an object. If I select this outside rectangle, it's going to pick everything inside it. But watch this. If I select the circle inside it, it's gonna take everything out of the selection there. And look what happens if I select the line. It's sort of gonna create an imaginary boundary. Let me escape. Let me see if the undo command works. Yep, undo deleted that selection, and so now I have. If we slice the block horizontally, this is what we're going to see. We'll still see the hole. The slab is not nearly as thick, but we're going to have a hatch. Other things you can do to hatch. Oh, let me just and in the flavor of AutoCAD. AutoCAD remembers the last hatch you did. It still wants to do gravel, and it remembers the properties. So if I select a new object, it's going to give me the same hatch and the same. Let's just assume that we have a much larger object, and we're going to put the same hatch on it. If I click the select, then what happens is the hatch is too tiny, and it's not gonna look like that on an object this big. It's gonna look different. So now we have to play with the scale of it. Because I made it so big, I think I'm gonna have to go with a really large number. Another 1,000, maybe a little smaller. So you have to play with the scale and make it fit sort of your object. If I go with something too small, then it's just going to be a whole bunch of lines that are too close together, and it will look like it's solid fill. I think 48, maybe 24. And I work on 48s and 24s because I'm used to the inch system. There's 48. There's 48 quarters of an inch in 1 foot. There's 96 eighths of an inch in 1 foot, and there's 24 half inches and a foot, etc. So I'm sort of familiar or accustomed to that scale. Other scales, typical, very popular. Let me just erase. I'm just gonna keep this here and just copy the rectangle. Let's just suppose that's the side of a house, and I want to hatch, and the siding is horizontal. That's an easy way to hatch. And and I see that is not a solid line, but each hatch has its own unique scale. So you may not necessarily land on a hatch that is at the right scale for you. For instance, this seems like the same lines as the one I originally picked. But if you notice, the scale is different. So if I select this hatch, I'm going to have to play with the scale of it to make it look where I want it to be. And let's say that's what I want. I was trying to put siding on a house, and I just went with something at an angle. Obviously, a house, I say obviously, but in most cases, a house is not, doesn't have siding at an angle. So there's some lines there. If this was a house, now we can play with that scale, the scale of this hatch, to where maybe we have 6-inch siding here. So rather than drawing all these lines, then I can just draw a hatch. I'm going to erase this hatch and very quickly put a window, and this is very quickly, like I said, and a door. Then I'm going to use my modify mirror command to put a window on the other side. So let's go again and try to put a hatch on this. So I go to the hatch command. If I select this, it's going to have everything in it. But if I select the windows and the doors, it's going to delete it from there. And now you can see how I have put a hatch pattern or siding hatch pattern on this house. Let me escape out of there, and it finishes. And you can adjust that, and I'll show you. I'll show you the other things you can do to it in a minute. I'm gonna erase this hatch, and I'm gonna do it again by using the other method. If you remember, I just selected objects, use the select command. AutoCAD wants to do the same thing you did before. The scale the last hatch I did was at 96, at a scale of 96, at an angle of 0, and I used select. But this time I want to pick points. If I pick inside the door, it'll select inside the door or the windows. But if I pick outside of those objects, look how it automatically deletes those things from the selection. So everything inside this closed boundary is going to be hatch. Once I select, I hit enter, then I have my hatch. If you notice, the hatch is sort of not centered, right? Too much, or I'm sorry, too much up here and not enough down here. And let's just assume that I have my sizes right here. One thing I can do to hatches is go back and edit them. So if I just click on a hatch, the hatch editor comes up. I can change the scale of it, and now maybe that actually looks a little more like a house. Maybe 64 is the right way to go. Yeah, there it is. But if you notice, still there's a tiny sliver of siding here, and what I can do is set the origin, and it puts the center of sort of my pattern at the origin. So let me try to set the origin to be in the geometric center of my elevation of this house. Set origin, and if I shift and right click, my OSNAP menu comes up, and if I select geometric center, then I can come here and watch what happens to the hatch. Nothing left to right because it's just lines going left to right, but top to bottom, the spacing is going to get a little nicer. I said that, but now the spacing moved up a little bit, so something funny's happening here. But maybe you know what? I selected the geometric center of the door, which happens to not be in the geometric center of my big rectangle. But let me try that again. If you notice, the door is a little off to the right, and you see by that grip it's not exactly there. So let me erase the hatch and move the door so it's exactly center in the house. But and when I did that, I didn't notice at the time it was giving me two geometric centers. I just picked the first one I saw. Let's try that again. I'm going to do hatch. I'm going to pick these objects, and it's still going to use the same geometric origin it did before, so it's still going to be out of whack. But I want to change it. If you remember, we changed that to 64, and it's still up and down is not right. Left to right is perfect. So let me set the origin at the geometric center of the big rectangle. And the reason it's selected 2 is because I was here in the neighborhood of two things. If I go up here, it gives me this one because that is the geometric center of that. If I go to this window, so anyways, I want the geometric center of the larger rectangle, and if I select here and I click there, now it's evenly spaced. And so it looks better. Just as an exercise, let me hatch the windows with something else. Totally. Obviously, there isn't a hatch pattern that would represent a window. Let's just maybe say bug screen. And look what happens. The bug screen is kind of big, so I know that I need to change that to something smaller, like a 1. And let's see what happens there. Obviously, a bug screen probably would look like that, but in order for us to see it, maybe I need to change it to something a little bigger. And there we go. So we have bug screens there. Now, because I put these two bug screens in at the same time, they act together, so they're linked together. I almost want to say that they're like blocks, and they can be exploded. And so if I explode it, there'll just be a bunch of little lines there. Now, AutoCAD selects the geometrics or the origin of this hatch sort of in the center of the whole thing. So it figures the center point um, um, of these two windows, and that's where it puts the hatch. And let me do a third hatch, just for the sake of argument. Now remember the last thing we used was net at a scale of 6. So if I go here, it's going to give me the same thing. Let's try to find something a little different. Maybe it's sort of a some sort of louver door. There it is. And I hit enter, and there it is. Now, it looks, I'm not sure, well, there's a tiny little space at the bottom, and there's a tiny little space at the top. It may be centered top to bottom, but it's definitely not centered left to right. So if I click on here, let me set the origin, and I'm going to select the geometric center of this rectangle, and it shows up right here. When I select it, now the hatch is centered left to right and top to bottom. So it looks like this distance here is the same distance as that. So that's the first thing you can do to edit the hatch. Of course, you can do it from the beginning and do all of that, but you can come back and fix your mistakes. Let's say that we wanted these to be at an angle, so we can change our angle to 45. And if you notice, the other one should have changed because, as I mentioned, they are linked together. So you can change the scale, meaning how close the lines are to one another. And that's important because if we print this window really close, then we're going to see the lines. But if we print this elevation from out here, it looks like the door is a solid object and the windows are solid objects as well. Let me try one last hatch. I'm going to put a roof on this little house, and I'm going to erase the middle and then mirror the pitch here. Research subjects, no. So I'm going to hatch inside of here. But what I'm going to do is make a mistake on purpose and not go all the way. So this is not a closed, it's not closed geometry, or it doesn't have a closed boundary. Let me try to hatch that. And if I click here, it's going to tell me that. It's going to give me that message that the boundary is not, it's not a closed boundary, so it's not going to work. That's my boundary, and that's my so it shows me where to go and find my mistake. Well, my mistake is here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend. I'm going to extend that line to there. And then I'm going to try to hatch again. Hatch. And there it is. So it's going to use the same hatch. It's going to use the same angle and all of that business from before. I can just make a hatch and change it later, or I can just find out what I want to do now. And I want to do, I noticed there was one called shakes. Let me find it here. Architectural shakes. And there it is. It shows me a line, so that means that, it's not small enough. Let me change it to 1 and see what happens. And there we go. So now we have cedar shingles on our roof. So we've used several different hatches, and we found ourselves having to adjust the scale of them to fit our drawing. Let me get rid of these. Make it look more like a house. So that looks a lot like a house. It kept me from having to draw all these little lines and trim them. It kept me from having to draw all these little lines and trim them and make them fit within this roof. One case, because I opened this drawing, the units are decimal. So let me open one of my drawings. Now, let me start a new drawing, and I'm going to start with the architectural template. And it takes me to the sheet. I'm going to go to my model tab. I'm going to draw a room that's 20 feet by 20 feet. So add 240, 240, and I did that because AutoCAD thinks in inches. So that's a 20-foot square room. If I list that, it's 400 square feet. Here's one hatch I used often. If we were in the classroom, you would look up at the ceiling, and I believe the ceiling in the classroom is 4x2. I like to work in 2x2 grids. So let's say I wanted to put a grid ceiling in here. Rather than having to draw all those lines every 2 feet or offset it or copy them, then I can just make a hatch that does that for me. And if I select in here, it's going to be too solid. So, and that's just an angle line. I'm going to purposely pick that one so I'm going to have to fix it later. I'm going to change that scale to 48 and see what happens. I believe it needs to be a little bigger, 96, still 192, enter. I'm just going to leave it there. And if I measure, the problem with my grid is the diagonal. So let's fix that. So it looks like those lines are going at 45 degrees. So let me change my angle to 45 degrees and see what happens. It looks about right. Let me measure the distance between these lines. And it's about 2 feet. The reason it didn't pick the lines is because, let's do that now. In the properties, in the options, and I think it's under drafting, it ignores hatches. So the snap ignores hatches. Let's not ignore hatches. And now I'll be able to measure between the hatched elements. So from that, and let me turn my endpoint on. Endpoint is on. Okay. So let me just go from here, perpendicular to here. Sure enough, it's 2 feet. One more time. Kind of went by quickly. From here, perpendicular. If you notice in the middle here, it'll give me that dimension is 2 feet. So remember I said I wanted a grid that's 2 feet by 2 feet. I could do that and then make another heads that's rotated. This is rotated to 45 degrees, so I have to rotate it 90 degrees, so it'll be 135. But let's see if I can find a hatch that has that. It makes sense that somebody would have made that. And here's one that's an angle, but because I'm already at 45 degrees here, it comes in straight. So let me just see. Actually, I'm going to confess now, I know that there isn't one that is not turned at 45 degrees. So let's pick that one, and then we can just manipulate it to make it look like we want. So there it is. It does, however, if you don't tell it, it's sort of, I believe, it sets the origin relative to the origin, the universal origin, the 0, 0. And that's why this thing isn't right. Let me test my theory here and copy rectangle, and from here to the 0, 0 point. Oops. 0, 0. If something doesn't work, I just draw a line to it from it and then use that as reference. Pro tip, I guess. So I'm going to move this corner to the end of that line. There'll be a 0, 0. So let's hatch that and see what happens. That's my theory. So if I put it there, so it looks perfect now. So I think that's what happens. If you don't say, hey, where the origin is, then it's going to go from 0. So any subsequent hatch after that is going to use the same relative origin. So let's do this here. I'm going to hatch here. I'm going to set the origin and the geometric center of this square, and look how beautiful it looks. Enter and see what when I move to here, now it's not as perfect as it was before because it's using, and I'm going to click so that we see those lines are along the same plane, and if we were able to offset every 2 feet, those vertical lines would line up the same. So that's the first thing we need to do. It lands, and let me erase this and just play with my 20 by 20 room, and I'm going to hatch it. And because there's no other hatch to reference by, if I click here, my grid is perfect because I happen to draw a room that it's in multiples of 2. What if my room wasn't in multiples of 2, and then my hatch wouldn't be so pretty. So let's make it still 20 by 20, but let's make it some random width. There. This is my rectangle. And again, I'm going to put a ceiling in this room. Another thing I can do. So here it is. And now, because it's using the same origin as this one, then it's going to be a little out of whack. But if I enter, and if I just select this very hatch and set its origin to the geometric center of this shape, then it centers itself. Here's a problem. We have a tiny sliver on the left and on the right, vertically up and down. It's perfect because we're at 20 by 20. So we have to shift that grid to the left or to the right. It doesn't matter. By 12 inches. It's geometric center. So here's where you need to do a little extra work. I'm going to draw a line from the geometric center of this rectangle from there, and I'm going to go 12 inches right. So there's a line there. It's obscured by my hatch. But now the center of my hatch is in the middle. It actually needs to be 12 inches to the left or 12 inches to the right. Or I can pick either way. It's going to slide it 12 inches to the left or the right. It's not going to slide the hatch this way out of my room. It's going to slide the grid to the left or to the right. So, and because I know the grid is 12 inches, or I'm sorry, 24 inches, I'm going to go halfway to make sure that I have nice, large enough tiles so it doesn't look so bad. And maybe I can center my lights there or whatever. So if I click on the hatch, I'm going to set the origin not to here, but not to the middle of this line. That's only 6 inches, but to the end of this line. Like I said, it could be this line going to the left or to the right. If I click here, it recenters my hatch inside of this room, and now it gives me larger tiles that look better. If I was going to put lights in here, now I can put let's see. If my light was 24 by 48, I'm going to change the color of it just so that it looks different and we'll be able to see it. I can put my light there. And now it's in the center of the room, and I get better light. So that's sort of the basic of hatches. Uh, Annotative, we've talked about annotative before. This hatch that I made is not annotative, but now that I made it annotative, what happens is if I change its boundary, it's going to grow with it. If it's not annotative, like this one, if I change the boundary, the hatch, well, let me rephrase. That's not what happens. I guess by default, it wants to stay with it. The other thing, let's ignore that, and I'll figure that out. Um, Say you started a drawing that somebody already drew a hatch, and you don't know the name of the hatch or how to find it. You can cheat by matching the properties. So I'm going to hatch. Remember, I said, let's just say I started this drawing and these hatches were there. I didn't know what they were. I can just hatch this and this with a different hatch. And I can just use my match properties from this hatch to those hatches. And it fixes it. Also, you can go and you can click on the hatch and do the same from within. To me, it's quicker. I'm undoing here. To me, it's quicker just to find the match properties button, click on the desired hatch, and click on my destination hatch, and it's there. Of course, it uses the same origin. If you notice, if we extend these lines, to extend the end of this line all the way to here, they would line up, and similarly, these lines would align vertically. So that's kind of the basic of hatching. Play around with it. It's sort of not an exercise that you can do much with until we have other things to go with it. I hope this makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions.